specializing in assisting families with disabilities. His education includes a degree in human psychology and another in biopsychology and social physiology. In running for mayor, Mr. Chen seeks to offer a platform which will improve affordability and prevent immigration from Vancouver. Thank you, David Chen.
It was interesting when I walked in here and checked in at the office, I saw Cecilia. She actually used to work at Strathcona Elementary, and I still feel at home because even though this is not my catchment area, I'm a Strathcona resident, and it's great to be in East Vancouver. How many of you are here because you're like, I don't have school, I don't have class, I got like this special, oh yeah, all right, let's be honest, that's why you're here. Okay, well, let's try to make this interesting for you. How many of you here actually do community service? Anybody? Wow, that's fantastic. My trip here, I'll be honest, when I sat in your seat more than 20 years ago, I had no idea that I would be doing this. It all started because I started helping the community. When you go out there, you'll start to understand the value of that. And it's not about what you get out of it. The Dalai Lama always said, the more you give, the more you get. And I've seen that. To be up here with all of my colleagues takes tremendous support from the community. You can declare, I want to be the mayor. Anybody can do that. But to actually have people backing you, that takes people knowing about you, people trusting you. And they trust you because you've helped the community. My history is, when I got out of university, I actually started with a program called the Underwater Council of British Columbia's Mooring Buoy program. We actually thought it was fun. We were divers. So we went out there and we installed permanent mooring buoys on reefs that our local dive shops would take people to visit. And we didn't think anything of it. But today, when you go to the Vancouver Aquarium, they have the historical pictures. And I see my picture there. And you realize the benefit that you give in the community when you do things like this. And that has continued on through the decades. It's always been about giving to the community. The latest thing I did, I've been the PAC chair of Strathcona Elementary. And I know that similar to your population here, we have a huge difference in social economic statuses, huge differences in cultures. And oftentimes they clash. And that's why I went out there and I became the PAC chair, because I wanted that to end. We need unity. I look at everybody, these are my colleagues, they're not opponents. All of you, you're brothers and sisters. We just have differences of opinion. So think about this. Put yourself out there, volunteer your time, do good for your
30
community,
seconds.
and one day you'll be where we are today. Thank you.
What do you all plan to do about the opioid/fentanyl crisis in Vancouver right now?
Great question. I think we'll start with Ms. Sylvester.
So part of the answer actually involves all of you. Statistically, we know by age 14, some of you have already experimented with alcohol. Some of you have experimented with drugs. Ask yourself this. I'm not going to identify you. I'm not going to ask you to put your hand up, because I was where you guys were. There comes an issue of self-esteem. Peer pressure comes into play. Some of you in this audience don't really feel great about yourself. You want to fit in. Peer pressure is going to push you to do things. And the reality is, if you stay on that track, you will be one of the ones out on East Hastings. It's a reality. It's sad, but it's a reality. So what I want to do is, it's a two-part equation. So Lucas, you have a fantastic question, because the first part is here. We stop it here. You need to build your self-esteem. You need to have inclusion. You cannot worry about what everybody around you thinks about you. I learned that in this race, because the funny thing is there's a lot of people that hate each of us, and they attack us like crazy. And if you don't have the self-esteem and the strength to stand up and say, I can do this, regardless of whether or not someone likes me, you're going to have some problems. When we get out to the real world, there was an experiment. It's called the rat experiment, rat paradise experiment. And what they did is they took a cage and they stripped it of all the interesting things. You just put some food, bottled water, and a bottle of cocaine water. That rat drank the cocaine water until it died. The other cage, what they did is they filled it up with food, drinks, all kinds of things, and the rat never touched the cocaine water. So when we're talking about what's going on out there's a lot of symptoms, but the core is we have to build the self-esteem of people. Stay educated, stay in school, stay connected with people. That's what's going to help. So we can provide the housing, we can provide the help, we can provide the 4 pillars. But at the end of the day, we still have to heal the very core problem of your self-esteem. Stay strong, everybody. Thank you.
What projects will you initiate to create a better living space for Vancouverites?
Repeat the question, please.
What projects will you initiate to create a better living space for Vancouverites?
Start with Mr. Stewart.
Mary, that's a fantastic question. So, I sort of agree about the 3% vacancy rate. That's a statistical thing. However, how many people here know that in your neighborhood there's an empty home? Anybody? Hands up. How many people have driven or walked, transited up and down Oak Street? You see the boarded up places. The places are fenced off. Anyone? Okay. The problem is, according to our best estimate, there are 25,000 empty homes in Vancouver. They are investments. They are not homes. And this is why Vancouver's in a crisis. If there's 25,000 empty homes, our vacancy rate is actually much higher than 3%. It's just wrongfully used. So the first thing I would say is that we need to not be afraid of using taxation and all of the legal powers that all 3 levels of government have to force those homes to become homes again. This is really, really important. The second thing is, and I know being a renter, I'm also born and raised here, we have projects here. They're all over the place. Some of them are run down. How many of you actually knew that there is a city bylaw that says the city can enforce that the landlords or the operators have to maintain that building at a satisfactory living standard? Anybody? I see a couple of head nods, but not a lot of. So this is a surprise to you. The city has never enacted that power. It needs to. The fastest way to fix the problem is to get rid of the empty homes, to fix the homes that are dilapidated, and to also activate new home spaces within existing homes. That's the fastest way you're going to deal with this. We can talk about creating more homes all we want, but we have a production capacity problem. So that is the fastest way to fix it, and that's what we plan to do if we are elected. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shane, and my question for you is, what is your first priority as a mayor?
Sorry, what was your name again?
Shane. And what is your first priority as a mayor?
All right, so my first priority is not going to be so fun, but it's really, really important. So, you know, Vancouver is sort of a business. There are expenses, there's income we have to deal with, and we have to run these services. So the first thing we actually have to do is we need to have a forensic audit of the books. How many of you actually knew that 10 years ago, the city budget was $700 million, but now it's $1.4 billion. We do not have double the population, we do not have double the cost of inflation, we do not have double the services. So where's the money? Do you know? Anybody have an idea? That's the number one question that must be answered before we can continue running this business called Vancouver. Oh, I see a hand there. You got an idea?
Taxpayers?
Shout it out.
Taxpayers?
Well, yeah, the taxpayers are paying for it, but where did it go? Right? Our budget's $1.4 billion. Do you see $1.4 billion in extra services or extra benefit from the city? Do you see more skate parks? Do you see more clean parks? This is a huge problem. So before we can fix a lot of the problems in the city, we need to find out what's going on with the money. So like I said, it's not really cool sounding, but a lot of you are going to start to find out sooner or later that as you grow up, your magic table, and I joke about this at home because when I was at home, I'd go to dinner, table had food, I'd leave, it would magically clean itself, and it would repeat itself every day. But when you grow up, and now you become responsible, that magic table disappears. So what happens is now you have to learn to budget. You need to learn to do things for yourself. And same with running a city. We need to know where the money is. We need to know how we're going to deliver the service. We need to know what you all need and want and how we're going to pay for that. Because guess what? A lot of us pull your pockets inside out. That's what the taxpayer feels like right now. All right? So like I said, it's not fun, but that's part of doing business. Thank you.
I'm Evelyn, and I have a question for Mr. Chen and a question for everyone else. So, Mr. Chen, you said that money is important, but will you think of people in need who are on the streets before you think of organizing all the money? And for everyone, will your business or work background affect the decisions made for the city, and will you be inclined to profit and promote your business if becoming mayor?
Ellen, that's a fantastic question. So for 6 years, I was actually a director of an organization called Beauty Night Society. How many people have heard of it? That's good, a few. First time I heard of it, I thought, a little crazy. You're going to give makeovers to people? But what they were doing was they were giving makeovers to marginalized women. Many were substance abusers. Many are victims of violence. All are basically homeless. And some were in the sex trade. And what happened was the system had failed them. And this novel approach actually cracked through the shell of some of the most hardened, marginalized women that I've ever seen. And they got off the substances. They became responsible citizens and productive citizens, and they cared about themselves. That self-esteem is huge. So in answering your question, it's not all about money, but it can be. The thing is that you have to open up your mind. So there was a study that was done that said that for each marginalized person on our streets, we are spending $134,000 a year to take care of them with housing, medical care, and the variety of services we do. There is a thought out there, it's called a guaranteed minimum basic income, that says instead of our poverty system, which basically gives about $10,000 a year to every marginalized person, like who here can survive off 10 grand a year? Anybody?
30 seconds.
Okay, well if you can't, imagine if you have mental illness, you have substance addictions, how do you deal with it? So the idea is if we raise the bottom and give a minimum floor, and we don't kick people down every time they make some money, we help them make even more, so they hit about $50,000 a year, which is where you need to be to survive in the city. Then we take away the help. That's how we can solve this problem. And that's a smarter calculation. Thank you.
I'm sorry, time has sort of flown by here, and it's about the time when I would offer the candidates an opportunity to make a closing statement. If you'd like to continue any questions, you can also. Sure.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sebastian. My question is, how would you address the ongoing issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women in Vancouver and in BC?
Thank you, Sebastian, for asking that question.
Sebastian, that's a tough question. So when I started with the PAC, I needed to try and bridge the gap. And so I started working and learning about protocol, learning about Aboriginal culture. And I will not admit to being an expert of the Indian Act. I've been told by elders within the community that, did you know that the Indian Act makes it so that for every incarcerated First Nations person, there's more money transferred from the feds to the province. There's actually no incentive to try and fix this problem. There's a huge level of distrust between First Nations, the authorities, and non-First Nations families. I can see that. It happens all the time. It took me 3 years to get to the point that I was adopted by an elder in my community. And that came with a lot of making mistakes, a lot of atonement, a lot of genuine trying to help seal that gap, know each other. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of times when you have that level of mistrust, things are not reported. People are afraid. Sean is correct. We have people within our community that every time the authorities are called, they worry that the kids are going to get taken. When you have that kind of atmosphere. How do you solve these things? When there's a level of not understanding about what it is to be
30 seconds.
then sometimes, I hate to say it, but authorities don't necessarily act on it. We see it in our community all the time. I can make a call to 911, they'll be there in like 5 seconds. Somebody else in the project makes a call, they won't show up. It's a huge problem. And that needs to end, because guess what? VPD report to the mayor. That's where it starts. That will change if I'm elected. Thank you.
Mr. Stewart?
Thanks, great question. We're talking about all kinds of issues.
James, thank you for that question. So here's the thing, this is where the psychology comes in. This is a ground war that needs ground warriors, not high-level talk. Everything changes when you change. So when we're talking about psychology, everything has to be positive reinforcement, not a negative thing. We know things have to be done, but your government has to help you make the right choice and make that choice easy. So within our Constitution, we built, as one of our pillars, something called sustainability. And it has to be socially, culturally, environmentally, and economically. And what we're saying is, we have to protect the environment, but if you make it difficult, it won't happen. Here's an example. I was at the aquarium with my kids. I had 3 kids, one's 2. And I had stuff, and I knew some of this was recyclable. And I stand up there, and there's 6 bins. And I got kids screaming. And I'm like, I want to do the right thing, but I got kids. So I threw it in the garbage. And that's what I'm talking about psychology. Because when you make it difficult, these things don't happen. So when we're talking about everything, we need to make it easier. When we're talking about transit, the reason why it's not being taken up more, it's not convenient, it's not reliable, it's not faster, and it's not cheaper. You need to do these things so it makes it real easy for people to make that right choice. So, in sort of a nutshell answer, everything we do with regards to protecting and cleaning up the environment will be based on how do we help people make that right choice. Not hitting them on the head saying, we have to keep this clean. You want to get rid of oil? Make electrics and everything else easier, cheaper, more affordable, etc. But if you don't, it's not going to happen. Thank you very much, Tupper.